this time last year. It was a very different Tisha B'Av. I think I'll start with something. The most common question I think I get answered in the 9 days is, Rabbi, can we use soap? We're a very generation which is very, very chalash, very shvach, very weak. The idea of aveilus for the Beis Hamikdash, what impacts us is, can I use soap? I remember when I was sitting Shiva for my father and my sister, Aleim Shalom, the last thing that entered my mind was whether I could use soap or not. One of the Gedolim of the previous door said about his generation that they were a generation of Yaakov ben Yaakov. In the Ashkenazi tradition, the only time you ever name a son after his father is if the father conceived the child with his wife and then perished, passed away at some point in the 9 months before the baby was born, and then he'd be called Yaakov ben Yaakov. If that was a generation of Yaakov ben Yaakov, Alachas kam v'kama are we, so disconnected. Rabbi Breitowitz explained this morning one of the reasons that there's a big difference between the aveilus of Tisha B'Av and Lo Aleinu, the aveilus of a close family member, is that the aveilus of a close family member hits a person with a tremendous clop. And the whole process of aveilus starts from the chamor to the more kal. You start of the day itself, onein, sitting shiva, shloshim, and the restrictions, the expressions of the pain of the tsar become less and less, until finally you get to the end of the year, Shana, and then of course every year, every Yortzeit, there's still the same reawakening. The process of mourning for the Beis Hamikdash is the reverse. Because this is a different kind of mourning, it's a mourning we don't really feel, and so the halacha guides us, our feelings, to feel the aveilus more and more. We start off with the 3 weeks. According to the Ashkenaz custom, we don't hold weddings, we don't shave, and then we don't drink wine in the 9 days or drink meat, and the day of Tisha B'Av itself. It's a different kind of aveilus, but nevertheless, it's very, very difficult for us. I confess, I spend a lot of koyach and energy and mental thought trying to get into it. It's because, as Rabbi Breitowitz said, the whole process of Tisha B'Av, the morning of Tisha B'Av, is to get into it, and aveilus for a lost one, a loved one, Lo Aleinu, is to get out of it. How do you get into it? And I think there are very specific reasons why it's very difficult for us to get into it. Rav Gifter, one idea is, Rav Gifter once said to his Talmud, who asked him why it was that he couldn't, it's actually, I've forgotten his name now, the author of the Arskol Kinos, if anybody has it, tell me what his name is, but Avram Foyer. He went to Rav Gifter before he sat down. I think he said it was like Motzi Chag, when he had to sit down and start writing. He'd been commissioned. He said, how do I get into the feeling? He said, the problem is that you're not misabel for the Churban every day. True, on Tisha B'Av there's a deeper sense of loss, but if a person doesn't feel the whole year any sense of loss, as we don't, then to suddenly arrive at a Tisha B'Av and expect to feel something is a little bit. To jump from 0 to 100. If you look in your Siddur every night, there's a thing called Tikkun Chatzos, where a person sits by the door, by the mezuzah, and mourns every day, not Shabbos, Yom Tovim, but every day for the Churban. I don't know how many of us do that. But I think there's something specifically about the world we live in which makes it very difficult for us to mourn the Churban. The Rambam says in Hilchas Tainus that on Tisha B'Av we mourn 5 things. 5 things. The first was the Lashon Hara of the spies when they came back and they gave an evil report about Eretz Yisrael. The second was the destruction, the burning of the first Beis HaMikdash. The third was the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. The fourth was the destruction of Beitar, not necessarily where Beitar is today. Beitar, a huge populous city where hundreds and thousands of Jews were slaughtered by the Romans. And the carnage was so great there that the Goyim, the non-Jews, fertilized the fields with Jewish blood for 7 years. And there was a miracle that their bodies didn't rot, and after 7 years they were eventually brought to Kever Yisrael, and as a result of that, Chazal put into our Birkas Hamazon, the fourth bracha, the Rabbanon Dika bracha of Hateva Meitiv. And then he says, we should just, by the by, understand why Beitar was such a tremendous loss. In that city, says the Rambam, there was a great king who was known variously as Bar Koziva or Bar Kachba, who the Gedolim and Rabbi Akiva amongst them believed could be the Mashiach. We lost Mashiach in that generation. Now, when you say Rabbi Akiva understood that Bar Kochba or Bar Koziva could have been the Mashiach, it doesn't mean that Rabbi Akiva made a mistake. Rabbi Akiva doesn't make mistakes. It meant that the potential was there in this man for the Gilui of Mashiach, and the generation, the Dor, were not Roy. And then the fifth thing says the Rambam, and on that day he says, which is Muad lepuronos, set aside for punishment. Turnus Rufus mimalchei Romi, Chorav es hahechal v'svivov, lekayim mashekosuv b'posuk Tzion sadeh techaresh. And on that day set aside for punishment, Turnus Rufus, from the kings of Rome, plowed over the Heichal, the sanctuary and its surroundings, to fulfill what it says in the Pasuk, Tzion, the site of the Beis HaMikdash, the Even Shasiyah. Tzion will be plowed over like a field. A ruin. Now, we have to understand that this list is not chronological. The first three events, the spies, the two Batei Mikdash, are chronological. That's the order they happened in. But the plowing over the Beis HaMikdash happened many years before the incident of Beitar. So if this is not a chronological list, what is it? Rav Moshe Shapiro Zeichat Livracha suggested that what we're seeing here is a descent down and down and down spiritually until you reach the nadir, the lowest point. But it's difficult to understand what was so bad about Turnus Rufus plowing over the Heichal. The Heichal wasn't a building, it was a ruin. It had been in ruins for decades. What is so sad about plowing over something which is destroyed? And the answer is, a ruin is a very sad thing, but a ruin is not just a ruin. A ruin is also a blueprint. A ruin says, this is what was. Don't forget what was. And you know something? What was can be again. When you take away somebody's memories, you take away their future. When you take away a person's sense of where he came from, you take away where he's going to. The Romans were so successful and have been so successful. And gentlemen, we all know, we've come from the world of Rome and we've seen how successful that silent Holocaust, which has destroyed more Yiddish neshamas than Yamach Shemo and all his cohorts managed to do with gas and flames. A silent Holocaust. Because Turnus Rufus was able to take our memories, our identity, and plow it over until it's now a beautiful field. He turned it into a theme park. That's it, that's the world. Go for it, live it. This is it. Forget the past. There's no past and there's no future. It's right now. Go for it, live it. Just do it. These are the slogans of the age. A culture which is dedicated to making people have no sense of conscience, what's going to happen, and no sense of responsibility, the past. The language of our age is the language of film or video, whatever you want to call it. Now they make films with video, but You have to remember that barely 150 years ago, the idea of films as a language, as a means of communication, was something just unthought of and impossible. Well, not impossible, because nobody really thought of it. You see, film started off as a penny arcade entertainment. People would have these booths, you'd go into this booth, and you'd see this horse very primitively jumping and running. And it's all dependent on something called, there's a physical anomaly of the eye called the persistence of motion, which means when you present the eye a series of still pictures which is slightly moving, the eye will stitch them together in the brain and make movement. I mean, we've all had, I'm sure as kids, had these flick books. You remember that's the same principle as the cinema. So basically the cinema started off as a penny arcade entertainment, and then there was a movie about 120 years ago which did something revolutionary. The film was called Grandma's Spying Glass, and it was about a 3-minute film, and the plot was extremely thin. Basically, there was a young child who picked up his grandma's spying glass, magnifying glass, and walked around the room looking at various objects. What made the film revolutionary was this was the first use of something called a point of view shot, POV. Now, a point of view shot is something so elementary that you don't even notice it anymore. A point of view shot is where, for example, you'll see the character doing whatever he's doing, in a medium shot, let's say, and let's say Grandma's spying glass, he'll pick up the spyglass and he'll put the spyglass to his eye, and then he'll cut to what he sees through the spyglass. That was the beginning of the language of film. With that, film started to have a language, and then of course it developed from that. And people understood you could tell stories. And if you could tell stories, you could elicit emotions, and you could present an entire cultural agenda, an entire Weltanschauung, an entire worldview. And that's what they've done. That's the success of Edom, whose current ancestors, the West, dominate culture. The film is the language of the age. George Bluestone, in his 1957 book, Turning Novels into Movies, pointed out something very interesting, I think, from the Jewish point of view. He pointed out that there's no present, that movies only have one tense, the present. Everything in a film exists in a constant stream of is. There's no future and there's no past. You can't say will, you can't say was in a film. And if you have to depict that, if the script requires that, then film has this very lumbering, very awkward convention, which basically, if you want to go back into the past, you have to do what's called a flashback. Now, a flashback involves the screen sort of going very woozy like this, and then the sound going all echo, 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 and yes, it seems just like yesterday when, boom, and we're back into the present. What does this mean? It means that the language of the age says there's only the present. Now, on this most subtle of cultural messages, it says there is no present. Edom exists in a continuous present. It destroyed our past and it destroyed our future. Because as difficult it is to think about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, it's even more difficult to think about Mashiach. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, but that emunah is something intellectual. Can I depict it? Can I feel it? Nothing in my world suggests that anything will ever change. And you know something? Everything that Hashem does has a good side to it. And if there was one good side of this previous pandemic that we experienced, is there was something that we understood called catastrophe. Hippuch, the total overturn of the world order. You see, for me, I was born right at the end of the 1940s. And until last year, till 2019, 2020, I had never seen something apocalyptic. Nothing where, there were wars and there were battles but something which actually changed the world. Now, if my lifespan had started at the beginning of the 20th century in Europe, I would have seen the world turned over several times. But one thing this taught me was, something, things can change. I remember there was somebody in my family who believed in God, but he had a big problem believing in Mashiach. And I said, He was a Zionist, and I said to him, by the way, look, if I told you, when you were young, he passed away a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, but if I told you when you were young that in your lifetime you would see a sovereign state, Jewish state, in the land of Israel, would you have believed that would be possible? He said no. Cataclysmic, catastrophic events can happen. Mashiach is a cataclysm, and we've seen a cataclysm taking place in front of our eyes. But as I say, these ideas are intellectual, at best, because they turned it into a field. It's very difficult for us, and the farther away we are from these events, the further enmeshed we are in the culture of Edom, the more difficult it becomes. The more, I'm not just saying don't watch films, which I am saying as well, but I'm saying the whole culture of the age we live in is in this idea of a continuous present. Now this, now this, now this. If you look at cutting rates, film editing rates, if you go back to the 30s, you know, like a scene and one shot could last a minute. Nowadays, anything that lasts more than 2 or 3, that's it. You know, like, why do people have ADHD? I'm not going into this now, but it could be one of the reasons is that we've trained our minds not to be able to focus. I see miracles every day that I'm able to teach somebody who grew up on an undiluted diet at MTV that I can still teach a Tosfos. Because everything about the media is this, now. And everything about learning the Havdil, Gemara, is hold kop. Keep this idea in your head. Keep this idea in your head. You got that idea? Okay, let's introduce another idea. You sure you got that idea? I was thinking it's a bit like juggling. It's like juggling in your head. Omarava, you got that? Yeah, sure. Omarava, Abaya, oh, whoops, you dropped Omarava. Let's start again. Omarava, Abaya, whoops, Omarava, Abaya, Omarabi Zera, Omarava, Abaya, and then of course that's just the beginning. And then you get into the flaming torches as the Achronim come out, and it's all taking place in your head. It's the most exquisite experience known to man. And it's the antithesis of everything that Edom stands for. Now this leads to immorality. Now this. It leads to Gilui Arai, it leads to Avodah Zarah. Now this. I want this now. The basis of all Avodah Zarah is the ability to try and control the forces around me. Now this. Shrichas Damim. I want this now, and I'm prepared to kill you for it. No conscience, no past, no future. That's the world we live in. My Rabbi, Rav Naftali Kaplan Shita, once told us that when he came to Yerushalayim, wow, it must be, I guess, about 60 odd years ago. He spent his first Tisha B'Av in the Shtiblach in Mea Shearim. And Mea Shearim hasn't changed that much, Baruch Hashem. And he told us he was giving us, and he told us that he sat down and he noticed that there's Alta Yerushalmi, this old Jerusalem Jew, and he had his kinos, back of book of kinos, which looked to him remarkably real for somebody of his age. And next to him was this box. And this Alta Yid said, as he said each kina, he tore it very carefully out of the book and he put it in Geniza. I'm not going to need this one again. Next year I'm not going to be here. I don't know how many of us are holding on that level. I don't know how many of us, and I include myself amongst us, I don't know how many of us thought that last year that Ohr Somayach would be hosting a celebration of Bias HaMashiach with appropriate lectures on that theme. And quite honestly, I don't know how many of us now are sitting here thinking, really believing that it's going to happen next year. That, my friends, is Churban. That is Churban Ba'etzem. And if we can't cry over that, if we can't cry, we have to cry that we can't cry. And we have to realize that we are Yaakov ben Yaakov. We're in a door which is completely cut off. The success of Edom. He's turned the Beis Hamikdash, the ruins, into a beautiful field, into a theme park. What do we do? How do we reverse this? Well, I was thinking to myself, the Sefer HaChinuch was written, debatable who wrote it, some say it was written by Rishon, and he wrote it for his son to learn on Shabbos afternoon. And there's a mitzvah Tesvav or Tezayin, not to break the bones of the Korban Pesach. And the reason that he says is because that on the night of Leil Seder we're like princes, we're like Malachim, we're like kings, and it's not fitting for us, as we've come out of Mitzrayim, like princes, like kings, to scrummage around and break the bones of the Korban Pesach to extract the last micro centimeter of the jelly in the marrow jelly, the marrow bone jelly. It says it's mitzvah d'oraisa, hossa. And then he goes on at a very great arichus, and he says to him, he writes in the book, and if you'd ask me, my son, why do we have so many mitzvahs connected with Pesach? So many. Pesach is so complicated, so complex. You've got you've got the water, you've got the baking of the matzahs, you've got the arbakosas, you've got the Haggadah, you've got the bdikas chometz, beer chometz. You've got a whole krach, a whole volume of Shulchan Aruch just on Pesach. Why do we need this? If you'd say this to me, my son, you'd be asking foolishly, because you should know. And he gives a principle now of great value. That the heart is drawn after the actions. It took behavioral psychology about 1,000 years to catch up with this. The whole essence of behavioral psychology is to get people doing things, because doing leads to feeling, and feeling leads to thought. It's true a person thinks a certain way and therefore they feel a certain way and they act a certain way. But the reverse is also true. If you do something, even if you don't have the feeling or the thought behind it, it will lead you to that. So clearly our avoda is to do, or what we're supposed to do. It could be in passing, I was just thinking that's one of the reasons why we put the tefillin on the arm first. The action leads to the feeling, the heart, and only after that, the heart becomes the head. That's the same process. V'shachanti b'socham, the pasuk says that we should build a Kodesh Baruch Hu, a Mikdash, a Mishkan, and as a result of that He will dwell in our hearts. In some mystical way, there's a parallel of the Beis Hamikdash that existed and its Churban, and the Churban in our hearts. We're all walking around with a Churban inside us. And the biggest Churban, as I said, is we don't see it. The biggest loss is when you don't even know you lost it. If we can build, it says the third Beis Hamikdash will come down from Shemayim. Now, I don't think it's like some kind of Deus ex machina, where the thing gets lowered down on ropes. I think that's a bit primitive to think that way. It seems to me that if we can rebuild the Beis Hamikdash v'shechanti b'socham inside ourselves, if enough of us can do that, then Mimela, there will be a gilui of the Beis Hamikdash, because we will already have built it. We rebuild the Beis Hamikdash every year with our tears on whatever level we can, with our actions as much as we can. So it seems to me that the avoda that we have to work on is already something that you can see in Eicha. In Eicha, some of the stanzas, some of the prokim, it's written in the acrostic, the first three prokim of Aleph Beis. If I'm not mistaken, in the second and the third prokim, the Aleph Beis, order of the Aleph Beis is reversed, and instead of going Samach Peh, it goes Peh Samach. The Gemara says, why was it written like this? Is because of the sin of this. I'm sorry, thank you very much. It says Ayin Pei, and then it turns around to Pei Ayin. The Gemara says, why is it that it was written this way? Is because they were makdim peh la'ayin. They put their mouths before their eyes. They literally, if you want to put it this way, they filmed a film script that they'd already written. They makdim the peh, they spoke it out, and then they saw it. They saw what they wanted that they'd already decided upon. The peh preceded the ayin. There's only one peh that can precede the ayin, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because if you look at the creation, it says over and over again that Hashem says, and then He sees. Hashem is the only existence, that can be makdim peh la'ayin. Our job is to be makdim the ayin to peh, to see truthfully what is there, which means ayin tov. Ayin tov will rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And ayin tov and devarim tovim, which result from that ayin tov, are the only way we will be able to do this. Ayin tov, to see the good in people. It's very difficult to see the good in people because basically all of us think we're better than everybody else. And if not better, then certainly as good. The nature of a person, we're competitive. We want to be more. I want to be more than you. Why do people? It's part of our nature. And we have to subdue that. And we have to find ways of using our mouth in a constructive way as a result of our eyes being used in the proper way. We have to see good. Our actions have ramifications, and the way we look at people will determine the way we speak to people and the way we think about ourselves. It's the root of gaiva, of all bad things. See well, see good. There's a story about a younger man who was about to get married. And as we know, when you go under the chuppah, for those of you who aren't married, B'ezrat Hashem this year, when you go under the chuppah, it's a Yom Kippur, private Yom Kippur, that you've forgiven all of your aveiros. So this younger man, he went to a gadol, and he said, listen, he said to the gadol, I cannot go under the chuppah, I've got this terrible weight on me, and I have to tell you about it. He said, when I was a young boy, this is already a while ago, in Yerushalayim during the Tzena, period of tremendous deprivation at the time of the beginning of the state. There was nothing there. He said, I grew up, we were so poor, nobody even knew what a banana looked like. And I was in Cheder one day, and the Cheder left a few coins on the stender, and he went out of the room. And while he was out of the room, I couldn't resist it. I was hungry. I took the money and I put it in my pocket. Rabbi came back, he saw immediately the money wasn't there. He said, who took the money? Who took the money? I wasn't going to admit. So he said, everybody please line up in front of the wall. And he went facing the wall and he searched each one of ours pockets, and I saw he was coming closer to me, so I took the money and I put it into the pocket of the guy standing next to me. And he searched me, I didn't have it, and he found the money in the pocket of the guy next door. And the Rabbi said, what's this? And this young boy said, I didn't take it. I didn't take it. And the Rabbi said, yeah, what's it doing in your pocket? What's it doing in your pocket? After that, the boy got a name of being a ganef. He lost all his friends. Bit by bit, he went down and down and down. He fell out of Yiddishkeit completely. He's a Chiloni now in Tel Aviv. He said this to the God. He said, I destroyed that boy's life. The Gadol said, no, you didn't. It wasn't your fault. You were young. You were hungry. You can't be blamed for such a thing like that. And the boy himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will understand what he went through in his trials and his tribulations, and he will judge him accordingly. You don't have to worry about him. So the Gadol, who I'm worried about, is the Rebbe. That Rebbe, with one unthinking gesture, move, ruined somebody's life. One word, one action. We're all so fragile, we're all so delicate, we're all so easily hurt. And each one of us knows this is true, because if you think about it, I know I get hurt very easily. I'm sure all of you do too. We know how sensitive we are. Shouldn't we apply that sensitivity to other people? Think. Avas chinam. Seeing the good in people. Don lekaf schus. A boy says he didn't take the money. Maybe he did. You're going to ruin his whole life because of that. And in Kiruv, we have to be very, very careful. Because a certain superciliousness can come with Kiruv. A certain feeling that we have the truth. A couple of years ago I was invited to go and speak at a gathering of young boys and girls who were the cream of Israeli secular society. They have these things called Machanot Kedam Tzva'i, which basically means pre-army camps, where basically, because these are the creme de la creme, they're going to go and be in leadership positions in the country, in the army, in industry, whatever. So quite wisely they want to have some contact with all sectors of Israeli society. And they send a group of these kids to have Shabbos with Haredi family. So they'd all had the Suda Shnia with the Haredi family, and I was asked to speak to them in the afternoon, and I basically told over my story. And this girl stuck her hand up afterwards, and she says, Rabbi, come on, do me a favor. You're not really Haredi. So I said, look for my membership card. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, you're not judgmental. The people that I had lunch with, the hostess there, made me feel like a Karkara Reka, an empty wagon. Now, I'm not sure if she knew this. Karkara Reka is an interesting phrase, because when David Ben Gurion wanted to try and establish some kind of truce with the Haredi community, he went to the Chazon Ish Zatzal in Bnei Brak, and he asked if there was some kind of way that there could be some coexistence, some pshara, some compromise. And the Chazon Ish quoted him a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which talks of a wagon, a laden wagon, struggling up the hill to Beit Choron. And the halacha is that the laden wagon has to give way for the unladen wagon. He said to Ben Gurion, we are a wagon laden with tradition, with thousands of years. He said, you are a karkara reka. You are an empty wagon. You have no traditions. You have to give way to us. I don't know if this girl realized what this conversation was, and she was being very clever and quoting it to me. But the worst thing you can do, except if you're the Chazon Ish, is to make somebody that you're trying to be Makara feel like a Karkara Reka. The worst thing you can do when you're doing Kiruv is to go out and treat the object of your Kiruv efforts, this poor, benighted individual who knows absolutely nothing, like I've come to save you. You are my esrog. You're my mitzvah object. I promise you'll turn them into a lemon. Somebody's a chiloni. That doesn't mean they're a Rasha. I'm not talking halachically. Could be that most people have the din of tinik shenishba, and even if they don't, even let's talk, purely practically speaking, you'll get nobody with somebody unless they genuinely feel that you love them. And it's, the nature of a Jew is to love another Jew. I love Jews. Jews are wonderful people. There's a story about Rav Aryeh Levine, during the time of the mandate. He used to go and visit the prisoners down there. They still got the prison there by Jaffa Gate. And he used to visit everybody. Of course, he went to visit the political prisoners who had no right to be in there. But along with them, there were a lot of very, very bad people. Murderers, ganavim, thieves. nasty people, seriously nasty people. And he used to treated everybody the same. He would go in, he would speak, he would try and bring comfort, he would try and say, can I do something? So he was talking to this, I don't know, this convict. And halfway through the conversation, this convict said, Rabbi, don't you see, I don't have a kippah on my head. So Aryeh Levin said, didn't you notice I'm very short? I can only see up to here. If we want to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, we have to rebuild the Mikdash which is nechrav in our hearts. And the only way we can do that is through actions, pe'ulot. Actions of giving. Giving brings to love. Find small ways to give and try and do it anonymously. And try and do it every day. There's a lot of things you can do. When nobody's looking, maybe pick up the bag of garbage, that one of the kids left by the dumpster and put it in. And have the kavanah. I want to be a person who gives, because people who give are people who love, and people who love will bring the Beis HaMikdash to light. It'll light up in my heart. And if it lights up in my heart, it'll light up in other people's hearts. It seems to me the only way. We're very, very far intellectually from what all that was, but the Beis HaMikdash is still in our hearts, and that's something we can access. Most of the mitzvahs in the Torah are mitzvahs ma'asiyos, are pu'ulot, are actions. Why? Because we have control over our actions. Feelings are very difficult to control. Thoughts even more so. Thoughts are like this everywhere. But the action leads to the heart, and the heart leads to the head.
The basis of our heart comes together.
Oh, thank you very much. Our friend just reminded me of something that I said in previous years, that there's an Aramaic word in the root of the word ahava, which is have, give, have. Thank you. In many ways, many things you can, if you go through with your eyes looking, thinking, what can I do? What chesed can I do today? Not because I want to be Mr. Good Guy, because I know that by doing this action of chesed, this will evoke in me love, and that's the love which will unlock the churban in my heart. And also, very good things to do is because, a different thing now is to catch, Rav Orlowik always says in terms of chinuch, it's very easy to catch your children doing things they're not supposed to be doing, because most of the time that's what they're doing. But catch your children doing things right. Catch people doing things right. For example, if you see somebody driving down the street and suddenly he comes to a halt, and there's a little child's toy, and he doesn't want to run over the toy, and he takes it and he puts it by the side of the road. That's a nice thing. So if you see something like that, write it down. At the end of the week, you'll find that, I'm not talking about, people leaping off buildings or charging into burning buildings to save people. I'm not talking about heroics. I'm saying just nice things. Or maybe it wasn't you that put that bag in the dumpster. Maybe it was somebody else. Oh, I saw somebody. And you'll start to realize that people are actually quite nice. And if people are quite nice, maybe they're as nice as me. And maybe they're even nicer than me. And that's the beginning of Ayin Tov. And Ayin Tov leads to Peh Tov. Devarim Tovim. Dibur. The word Dibur is from... Dibur is connected to Devar. We create the world with our words. Like Hashem, Sha'akol Nihiyeh Bidvaro. Everything is words. Dvarai asher samti b'ficho. Hashem placed His words in our mouth. The power of creation is the power of words, and the power, God forbid, of churban too. I want to finish with a story to show you the power, how something that can happen in somebody's childhood, the reverse of the story I told you before. There was a fellow who grew up in Bnei Brak, and he went off the derech completely. He rebelled, and Maybe he had good reason to rebel, who knows? Not everybody has glut experiences as they go through the Orthodox community. Anyway, he rebelled and he went to live with an uncle of his in Tel Aviv. And completely fried out, did everything he wanted to do. And he started to go to nightclubs, etc., etc. And he met a girl from Sweden, non-Jewish girl, and they fell in love, and he decided he was going to marry her. So this was already too much even for the uncle. He says, you cannot marry this girl until you go back to your parents in Bnei Brak and tell them what you're planning to do. So he agreed on certain conditions. The only day he had spare was Shabbos. So he was going to have to go on Shabbos, and he didn't want anybody interfering with his lifestyle, thank you. So there was this guy standing out there in Bnei Brak on his parents' veranda, his mirpeset, on Friday night with his iPhone, smoking a cigarette. The following morning he was out there doing the same thing. Come Shalosh Shudas time, his father says to him, I'm going to hear a shir from Rav Aaron Leib Steinman. Do you want to come? So he said, okay. So they go to the shir. After the shir, Rav Steinman, the father takes the son over to Rav Steinman and says, this is my son, unfortunately, he's not keeping Torah mitzvahs anymore. And so Rav Steinman said, how long has this been going on? So he said, 2 years. Rav Steinman said, in that 2 years, did you ever have hirhure tshuva? Did you ever think of doing tshuva? And he said, yeah. Rav Steinman said, how many times? He said, 4 times. He said, how long, each time you had this thought of doing tshuva, how long was it for? So he said, 10 minutes. So Rav Steinman says, so let me get this correct. In the last 2 years, you had 40 minutes of B'mokum Bali Tshuva Ein Tzadikim Omdim Sham. For that, I envy you. Put his hand out, good Shabbos, and he walked off. Rav Steinman's words shook this fellow. He went back, very somber. The iPhone was not to be seen, no cigarettes were to be seen. Went back to Tel Aviv, he broke off the relationship, and he went back and became frum. There's something that doesn't make sense about this story if you've been following it. Why on earth would this fellow go to hear a shir from Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman and Shalosh Shudas? Somebody asked him, he said, when I was in Kita Dalet, we all went to be tested by Rav Aaron Leib. And the Rabbi said that we should make the questions very simple, so he asked a question to each of the boys. Each one answered the question, then he asked me a question, and each one went in separately. And he asked me a question, and I didn't know the answer. So he asked me an easier question. I didn't know the answer to that. So he asked me an even easier question. I didn't know the answer. So as we were going out, each of the boys got their sweetie. And he called me over and he said, in Yiddishkeit, we don't get paid for results, we get paid for efforts. All those boys answered one question, so they got 1 sweet. You tried to answer 3 questions, so you get 3 sweets. Those 3 sweets sowed a memory in this boy's heart. And even many, many years later, when push came to shove, Rabbi Aaron Leib could open up his heart. The Beis HaMikdash, gentlemen, is in our hearts. And that Beis HaMikdash is also in a state of ruins. But if we, through our actions, through our kindly thoughts, through putting our ayin before the peh, by looking and seeing, by being short and having our eyes come up to here, surely Bezrat Hashem, with all the culture that surrounds us and all the difficulty we have feeling these feelings, I really hope Bezrat Hashem this time next year, Ohr Somayach will be hosting the festival that Rabbi spoke about this morning. Bezrat Hashem.